So functional movement patterns are not just great for exercise, but they're good for life. That's why they're functional. And probably one of the most functional patterns is the squat. But there are lots of things that can go wrong with the squat. And one of which that we see a lot is individuals with tight ankles. So as I squat, the truly functional squat is basically getting, as we say, all the way down or ass to grass. So I'm trying to get my hip crease below my knees, but it's not really a functional squat unless I can sit here comfortably. Because if I'm having to hold myself up, I'm gonna last maybe a minute and then my quads are on fire. If I can sit all the way down such that I'm resting with my hamstrings against my calves, this really takes very low effort. It actually helps open up my low back, so I'm standing for an extended period of time. It helps me to relax my spine because now I'm able to support myself on my knees. And now I can do work on the ground without having to stay actively engaged, especially if I'm not under load. But in order to be this comfortable, there are a couple mobility points that we need. Obviously, I have to get into a deep knee bend. So if my knee capsule's tight, that's gonna restrict me. I have to have good hip mobility. So good external rotation, good groin or abduction, so I'm able to keep my knees open so I can sit nice and tall. But the one that really gets people is the ankle mobility. And this is where people, they kind of try to paint the squat in black or white of you should do this, you shouldn't do this. When in reality, there's a lot of gray area, and sometimes it's nuance of when it's supposed to happen. For example, the knees over toes argument. If I were to squat all the way down in this position, you can see my knees are well beyond my toes. And I have to be able to do that if I'm going to sit up straight. So good neutral posture. But if I were to pull my knees back, so if I were in the camp of the never let your knees go beyond your toes guys, when my knees come back, it's pushing my butt backward. Now there's too much of me hanging out and I'm gonna start to fall over. So then in order to stay down here, I have to lean over and now I'm hunching and I'm loading into my spine and now this does not feel good and feels like activity. By that same token, when I squat, if I start driving into my knees immediately, joints that load initially load maximally. So if the first thing I do when I go to squat is I push into my knees, I'm creating a lot of shear right at that patella tendon, and I'm trying to slide off of what we call our tibial plateau, or basically where my thigh bone meets my shin bone. I want them to stay stacked, and if I have a nice ramp, my knee or the thigh is trying to do this and slide right out the front, and that doesn't feel great. Well, if I push into my hips first, you can see how my knees pull back. So now I have more of this backwards or posterior bias, sparing the knees and capitalizing on the much stronger hip joint. And as I squat, only then do my knees slowly start to come forward, and right at about parallel, do my knees then finally break that line. But if my ankle is stiff, I can get you to squat to about here, but then when the ankle refuses to allow the knees to come forward more in that bottom position, then this happens. And this is what we call the immature squat, where we tell people hips down and they go, well, if I put my hips down, I'm gonna fall over. And they're right. And if that's the case, they're not feeling pressure because that ankle joint is very powerful and stiff. And so they're not feeling any kind of sensation or binding there. They just know I can't do, and if I force it, I fall over, which is no bueno. So what we do to test that then is sometimes when someone's in that bottom position, I'll simply take my hands and help pull their knees forward and say, okay, now sit upright. And they go, huh, look at that. And go, now that I'm actively fighting the ankles, I'll ask them, where do you feel it now? Like, oh yeah, I really feel either tension behind in my calf or I actually feel pinching in the front of the ankle. And that's one that a lot of people struggle with because they don't realize that the ankle has a capsule that goes all the way around the joint. And so if the capsule is tight, it prevents that joint from moving the way that it should. And so we can use something very simple to challenge the ankle joint where a normal stretch is going to be unable to. And that would be something as effective as an exercise band. So I can take an elevated surface just so I can get some better leverage for the stretch and then use the band to create what we call distraction. Distraction is essentially the opposite of compression. When I compress a joint, I'm grinding it into itself. But if I need to stretch that balloon and I don't want to agitate the joint, I can keep the joint in the exact same position, but simply start to pull it apart. So now that balloon is being stretched, that capsule, we're starting to challenge and create more elasticity in that tissue, but the joint is in the exact same shape. So I'm not really challenging the integrity of the joint, of the articulating surfaces, of the bone, nothing. It's just that joint capsule. So what I can do is take this band. We're trying to get our foot up on the box with the band around the ankle, but sometimes that's a little difficult to do. So I have a little bit of a hack. And just to give you a visual of why that's challenging, here's band on foot. Doesn't work very well. So for the initiated, what I like to do is take this all the way up to the hip, put the foot on the box at your leisure, and then I can simply straighten the leg and slide this band into place. Way easier than trying to fight the band. From there, my foot is completely on the box, especially my heel. We can see that the band is right around the front of that ankle where I feel that binding because I'm just rolling out and driving into the front of my foot from where my shin bone meets the foot. And I'm supposed to have this backward glide at the ankle joint. So if I keep rolling forward, I roll into the bony structures and I just feel binding and pressure. But if I have the band pulling me backward, now I can continue to glide in place rather than roll out of where it's supposed to. So I sit down to keep that heel trapped, and now I can use my body weight to lean forward, to create that range of motion that I'm trying to elicit in the bottom position of the squat, but the band is helping to pull back, to undo some of that binding in the front, to create that better, was a posterior distraction or posterior glide at the ankle joint. And now I can get a much more effective stretch. And since especially when we're in that bottom position, we need to have that good external rotation, I don't want my knee to dive inward. So I'm going to drive it forward and out. So that way I can really get into the exact same shape and position that I need when I squat. So now that I'm challenging that ankle, I can then get into that bottom position. And as I sit, I open. So as you can see, my knees aren't just coming forward, I'm getting good torque through my hips. So my feet are relatively forward. They can be slightly open, that's fine, but my knees need to be outside of the feet to create that torque, to activate the hips. And as you can see, when I do, my heel really hooks into the ground and I'm grasping with my feet, all because now I've unlocked that mobility at the ankle joint. So as I'm on the ground, when I drive in, you can see how my arch collapses. I can squeeze the ground, but I really don't get much out of it. But as I twist, you can see how that arch lifts up almost even more. And you can tell I'm grabbing the ground because you can see how all of my toes are turning white. So my heel is hooking in, I'm grabbing that earth, and getting that nice external rotation anchors me to the floor, which makes it much easier to transfer energy. So if you have stiff ankles, everything upstream is going to suffer. So if you find you can't get ass to grass and you're one of those individuals, that may be a fantastic place to start.